So
I
she
don't know.
says.
It'll be entertaining.
I
All
mean,
right.
it's gonna be something.
Well, thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, depending on where you are right now. Carlos is not able to join us today. He has a prior engagement, unfortunately. So at the last minute, I brought in a very wonderful friend of mine. His name is Duncan, and he's based actually out of Turkey. So, Duncan, what time is it where you're at right now?
It is 9:08 Istanbul time.
Oh my. Okay. So I appreciate you taking time away from your Patriots game to to be on with me and to sort of just be my sidekick while Carlos is away.
Oh, you're more
I
than welcome.
yeah, I really appreciate that. You're a very funny person, and I'm hoping that you make me laugh today because the climate change stuff is not something that makes me laugh too often.
No, it's really not a comedy show, unfortunately.
No, absolutely. So why don't we get started? I just want to thank everyone for joining us. You've been watching, well, you are watching Stand Up Fight Back, where we discuss strategy and analysis for the progressive movement. I'm your co-host, Margot Pies. I'm a scientist, engineer, and occasional journalist. And Carlos Marroquin is usually our co-host, but he has a prior engagement today, so I brought on Duncan, who will be sitting in for him and hopefully livening up the topic for us because we're going to talk all about the United Nations COP26, which is the big climate change conference that happens annually. And this was the 26th of it. It happens, as I said, annually. So the 26th year of the climate conference. And for all
26 years
intents
of
and
being a. Oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Well, 26 years of being aware that there's a climate problem, yet 26 years of total inaction, unfortunately.
Yes, exactly. And that's really unfortunately still the case after the 26th year because even though there's been some agreements that came out of this, like apparently China and the United States have decided to work together now on climate change, which I guess is good. Although it was a completely very ambiguous agreement to work together. That doesn't seem to lead to any action. There was also an agreement on methane reduction, which is still also very open-ended. There was in the 11th hour a watering down of phasing out coal. And get this, Duncan, for the first time, apparently in 26 years, the mention of fossil fuels happened. Like this
Wow.
document was the first time in 26 years that they actually mentioned fossil fuels.
It's incredible. After like centuries of actually using coal and other sorts of forms, we have recognition that it's a real actual thing. So congratulations, COP26.
Yeah. Congratulations, world leaders. You've saved the day yet again. So I wanted to, let's see, I made a list of all of the things that kind of went down. And let me see here. Yes, first mention of fossil fuels in 26 years. The coal agreement was watered down, which was watered down by China and India. I guess they really like their coal. So there was this issue of financing, so this loss and damage financing due to climate change, which directly impacts the global south, poorer nations, island nations, and they were all really advocating for this, fighting for this, and that didn't happen. So there's no financing because countries like the United States are not interested.
Oh, of course.
So nothing good coming out of that. They don't want to help any of the other countries. So no loss and damage financing. Also, no mention of oil and gas. Huh.
Although I have seen recently that Biden opened up, I want to say 20 million square miles of the Gulf of Mexico for extra methane and gasoline drilling. So there's mention of it, just not at the actual conference, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, because he's worried about gas prices, I think. So that takes a priority
Hmm. The
over
years
the
it'll take to
climate.
actually extract any of that fuel is definitely worthwhile in our immediate short-term gas problem.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. Oh yeah, phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies. So that was mentioned, but that was also watered down. So again, like fossil fuel subsidies, is massive. It's like $1 trillion worth. I mean, it's a huge amount of money that goes into these subsidies, and it basically completely distorts the market. So, like right now, renewable energy sources are actually cheaper than fossil fuel sources, but with the subsidies, you wouldn't really know that.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it was good that it was mentioned. Congratulations, United Nations. Yeah, so according to some activists, these pledges fall short of limiting the 1.5 degrees Celsius, while others are saying it at least survives. So this goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius at least survives another year. Apparently, they like after the Paris Agreement, it was supposed to be like every 5 years that they would reassess this, and now they're going to do it next year. So instead of another 5 years, which would certainly completely blow it out of the waters, but I guess now it's hanging, by a thread. Maybe we'll see what happens next year. But I think it's a lot of kicking it down the line, somebody else's problem kind of thing. Apparently, we need to cut 50% emissions in 8 years to stay at 1.5 degrees Celsius or less.
Yeah, I don't really see that happening, unfortunately, but it's a nice goal to set. It's nice that people agreed on that, but it'll be very, very different to see actual action.
See, that's the thing. The United Nations didn't agree to phase out emissions by cutting them in half within 8 years. No, this is what everybody else is saying, because actually what a lot of the rich nations are doing is saying, oh, we'll do it by 2040, or like India is like, oh, we'll do it by 2050.
We'll do it once everything in the world is underwater already and Florida is gone.
Exactly. So this is the actual action we need. Like what activists and scientists are saying, like you need to cut emissions by 2030, cut it in half by 2030 if you want to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius global heating. So that seems like that was not taken into consideration at the COP. Let's see. Here's a really good point. There's 2,700 billionaires. And there are 600 more billionaires than there were a year ago.
Oh, that's good news.
So we continue to have this redistribution of wealth going to a small number of people. And yet somehow there's no money to pay for any of these things that we need to save the entire planet and keep it habitable for the rest of humanity's existence, right? So just something to think about that. If you're wondering where the money is, I think there's a transfer of wealth happening here.
It's pretty easy to follow once you start paying attention. Exactly.
Yeah. So basically, it seems to me that the COP26 was ultimately a point in which our world leaders said that money, profit, and the influence of corporations and the ultra rich are more important than the lives of everybody else, like the almost like other 8 billion people on the planet, especially people in the global south who are already dealing with climate change on a horrific scale, like in Madagascar, where they're suffering a massive famine. People are eating cactus leaves and ash just to feel full. I mean, it's horrible.
The drought there is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it's awful. And then you have island nations where they're literally sinking. These atoll island nations that are sinking. They're within 20 years maybe they may not even be able to exist as nations. So there's this huge going to be this huge migration of people happening very soon within our lifetimes, and it's amazing that our leaders don't care. But what they do care about, though, is security. And we have a clip that I wanted to show. I have several clips, but I want to start with this one, which is the Nancy Pelosi clip. So, because I think it really reveals he really reveals like what the politicians really care about here. And it's not so much that they're interested in phasing out fossil fuels or keeping it in the ground or really transitioning, a just transition, etc. But what they're really concerned about is these grubby, ugly little brown people coming from the South and invading their countries, right? So, and by their countries, I mean, the rich white West. So let me go ahead and get this back up here.
Okay. All right.
All right. So we have Abby Martin of the Empire Files. And so this is also very funny because it starts out with Nancy Pelosi saying, "Oh no, let's get a woman, equal rights." And little does she know that she picks Abby Martin, who is just like incredibly
not that woman.
Yeah, exactly. I think she really regretted that she called on this woman.
Wait a minute, I want a woman. I want a woman. A woman. A woman. Gender equality here. Maybe I don't. Let's see.
Abby Martin with the Empire Files. Speaker Pelosi, you just presided over a large increase in the Pentagon budget. This Pentagon budget is already massive. The Pentagon is a larger polluter than 140 countries combined. How can we seriously talk about net zero if there is this bipartisan consensus to constantly expand this large contributor to climate change, which is exempt from these conferences? Military is exempt from climate talks.
Well, I just want to use an example if I can. The sea level rise is an important part of, what's happening to the climate. And I am not a defense person, but I've had so many talks with the Defense Department, with the Navy in particular, about how they have to respond to what's going on. So I really do think that there is no reason why what we're putting together, with Build Back Better and other things can't respond to the Defense Department and have the same impact in terms of reducing emissions. And I do think that the Defense Department is very much aware of the fact that they have to play a major role, both from a strategic as well as, for the good of the world. So I don't see what we're doing in any way or, increasing the defense budget as being something that's inconsistent with climate action. I really don't.
And may I just add that national security advisors all tell us that the climate crisis is a national security matter. It is, of course, a health matter for our children, the water they drink, the air they breathe, etc. It is a jobs issue between clean technologies being the future of our workforce and the training for all of that. It is a national security issue because of the all of the conditions that climate crisis produces. I won't go into all of them, but they are cause for migration, conflict over habitat and resources, and again, a security challenge.
Yeah, so this
Clearly
is where the...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, clearly the issue with involving military, the pollution by the U.S. Navy, the best way to solve that, of course, is to spend more money on the Navy.
Yeah, so, obviously. If we're going to solve climate change, we might as well do it with bombs and fighter jets. And
we have to modernize our more clean and green fighting machine.
Yeah. And, there seems to be no problem when it comes to finding money for the military. And the United States military is a bigger polluter than as many as 140 countries. And if the U.S. military was a country, it would have been like the 47th emitter, like in the top 50 of, worst emitters of CO2. So why are we funding this? It doesn't make sense. I mean, Nancy Pelosi goes to the United Nations COP26, where we're supposed to be talking about saving the planet, keeping global heating under 1.5 degrees Celsius, drawing down our fossil fuel use. And instead she's like, no, we really got to put more money into one of the biggest polluters, because security. And what is the security? What are they worried about? Is they're worried about all these migrants coming over. They're worrying about destabilization. The climate crisis is going to destabilize whole societies and probably cause new wars and a horrible, horrible situation. And so to them, they figure, it's much more important to defend the borders and have some bombs to still be number one.
Oh, of course, you have to. America is the best. What's amazing to me, though, is looking at the actual current refugee crisis or migration crisis around the world. And I don't mean to, toot the horn of my host country here, but Turkey has over 4 million refugees within its borders already. And the idea that you might have a surge of migration from sub-Saharan through northern Africa across the Mediterranean, a lot of that ends up getting stalled here. And if we think about, the way that people generally react to it, the whole concept of bringing in refugees, even if it's paid for by the UN or some other organization, is unpopular everywhere. And I mean, the US has very, very few in comparison to places like, well, Turkey as a primary example. And you see the backlash, the political backlash that it has here too. So even though, the goal is to help people, maybe if we just enabled people to stay where they are, things would be a lot better rather than trying to find them a new home in another country and deal with all of the other problems that go along with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the obvious solution, right? I mean, it's also the obvious solution to just stop using fossil fuels, but somehow we can't do that either. So yeah, I mean, this is going. I mean, we're already seeing a migrant problem. I would say problem, but migration happening because
It's certainly
of droughts.
a crisis, yeah.
Yeah, and this is just the beginning. Droughts, desertification. The Amazon is now a carbon emitter instead of a carbon sink. Like, these things are just going to spiral out if we don't do anything by the end of this decade. So
And
I have
the worse
another.
it gets, the worse it gets, of course. Yes, please. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay. You're right. It's all feedback loop, positive feedback loops, and we're really playing a game of roulette here, because scientists know that there's these tipping points, and there's a variety of them, like methane, melting of the Arctic, the oceans overheating, ocean acidification. Like, we know that there's tipping points, but we don't know when they're going to happen. So you're really playing a very dangerous game by continually pushing action to the next year and the next year to the next decade and so on. And on that subject, I want to play another clip from President Obama. And I got this from a climate activist, Vanessa Nakate's Twitter page. And she's an activist. She's in her early 20s. She's from Uganda. And we'll listen to a clip of her speech a little bit later. But I thought this was extraordinary. And it really highlights that people are not stupid. That especially the climate activists, they know what's going on. And they're not words. These nice words are meaningless.
America bears our responsibility to address climate change. We must have financing that helps developing countries adapt, particularly the least developed and most vulnerable countries to climate change. We will engage in a global effort to mobilize $100 billion in financing by 2020. It is better for us to act than to talk. America bears our...
Well, I mean, the problem here is that they spent all the money on TARP and giving money to the banks who, lost all their money on those mortgages that went belly up.
Yep. Yeah.
We didn't know that was going to happen. Come on, that was early Obama.
Wait. This was 2009 Obama already. Didn't
early
they
Obama.
hadn't TARP happened at this point?
Well, it had been passed, but he had to go about implementing all of it, and he could have overridden it, but he didn't. So
yeah,
this is what happens when Citibank picks your cabinet.
That's right. Obama had like one of the most friendliest Wall Street cabinets of any administration. It's pretty incredible. And yeah, so they promised they were going to give all this money to finance and this. Protect the vulnerable nations and etc. And it never happened. Like 10 years later, more than 10 years later, they're still arguing over this money. Like, it just hasn't appeared. So it went somewhere. That money went somewhere. It definitely did not go to the UN's coffers in order to be distributed to the people and the countries that needed it in order to fight climate change.
Did he give a dollar amount? I didn't actually catch that. If there was a specific amount that he mentioned.
Let's see.
I know the word billion got tossed around, which is of course less than the trillions it's really going to require to actually.
Here, let's watch this again. Okay.
America
Who
bears
doesn't like
our
Obama
responsibility to address climate change.
I think he gives a number.
We must have financing that helps developing countries adapt, particularly the least developed and most vulnerable countries, to climate change. We will engage in a global effort to mobilize.
So it's 100 billion in financing by 2020. It's 2021, and that money never appeared.
And how much gets spent on those emergency military funding resolutions that come up every couple of years where they have to just extend the Pentagon budget by another 70, 80, 200
Isn't
billion
that,
dollars?
aren't they usually like in like the 700 billion range, something like that?
Oh, that's the usual budget. I mean, just the incremental increases. Incremental increases, of course. Which is way more than that 100 billion number. Those we don't debate. But saving the planet and actually allowing life to continue as we know it on this planet for the next generation. I mean, that's not super important. We have to, buy bombs from Lockheed Martin.
Yeah, so recently they did Code Pink says they opposed a 22 billion increase to military spending, and that was just in 1 year.
And that's a fifth of it.
Yeah, so multiply that by 10, that's more than enough. But yeah, we gotta pay all our military contractors. So this was also kind of a heated thing at COP, and I think I might have a.
Is that what they're calling it, COP?
Yeah, they've been calling it COP.
Okay. This is what happens when I don't get exposed to American news media.
Yeah, I don't know what they call it overseas, but in the English,
they don't even call it anything. They call it Tayyip didn't go.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Does Tayyip believe in climate change?
I'm not allowed to have opinions about that.
Oh, that's right. This is a public thing. Duncan loves his home country, his host country, very,
my home
very
country,
much.
Yes. My host country also, but in different ways.
Yes, they treat him very, very well. So I will share another clip. Okay, I think this is it. All right, so this is tying back to this, $100 billion that were promised in the 2009 that was supposed to come to fruition by 2020. So again, yes. So, and of course, the irony is that Obama showed up again this time, and he was like, "Oh, don't give up hope, kids! Like, keep fighting. You guys are fighting the good fight.
Keep fighting for all those things I didn't do."
Yeah, exactly. That I didn't care about because it made me super rich. So they're still fighting about this. Like, hey, you owe us money. Like, so interestingly, Scotland put up some money on the table and was like, look, we're a little country, but we'll put up some money and let's see who else puts some money on the table. So this was, let's see, it was like the UN. Some UN representative who was doing a press conference, and he talks about it.
To add very quickly, the true leader that has emerged here in COP26 is not a party to the convention. She is our host. She is the First Minister of Scotland. Just before the COP started, she put £1 million of Scottish money on the table for a new fund on loss and damage and challenged all the other leaders to match it. Yesterday, she doubled the amount. Okay, so she is the true leader who is putting money on the table for loss and damage. The US is giving us $0. Europe is giving us €0, but Scotland is giving us $2 billion. To add very quickly, the true.
So
Nicola Sturgeon doing a lot more than Obama ever did.
Yeah, that's gotta be embarrassing, right? Like, the United States is the richest country in the world, and they can't even put $1 million on the table.
And she kind of represents the Scottish, like the nationalist party in Scotland, and she's still giving this money to help the world. So if that
That's
tells you anything.
that says a lot of very bad things about the state of the U.S. and also Europe. I mean, these very wealthy nations are so selfish. They can't give any money. Like, it just, to me, it seems like you're just so enthralled or so captured by certain interests who expect that money to go to them, that they can't even give a little bit of money away. And it's not like the UN is not also willing to, have pledges from private sources. Like I said before, there's let me bring out the number again, 2,700 billionaires in the world, and in the last year there were 600 more added. So in, let's say this was 2020, there were 2,100 billionaires. In 2021 there's 2,700 billionaires. So again, like, these people are billionaires. Jeff Bezos spends all his money sending himself out on a penis rocket into space, and when he could have given a little bit of that money to this fund. And like, these people are so incredibly selfish that they have no problem destroying the planet, destroying every species on the planet, just so that they can get a little bit richer.
Or so they can just go to space for fun. Yes.
Yeah.
They can brag to their friends, I went to space.
The funny thing is, okay, so Elon Musk sold some of his Tesla shares.
I saw that it was like a Twitter poll that he sold $5 billion in stock.
Yeah, he sold
I'm not sure if there's a particular.
He sold 6.9 billion. He said he was going to sell. Yeah, he did a Twitter poll. He's like, should I sell 10% of my stock? And everybody was like, yeah, you should pay taxes on it. And so he sold 6.9 billion. 6.9 billion. He doesn't need that. He could just give it to some nations like,
I'm sure he would
like
disagree
Tuvalu.
whether or not he needs it.
Oh, well, he claims that all of his worth, all of his money are in equities, and
until he sells it, and then he actually
until he
has
sells it. Yeah. So this is sort of the state of what is happening right now with our inability to take action, because we basically live in like this very strange neo-feudalist type world now, where
it's like late stage capitalist dystopia, and it's very similar around the world, really, in terms of concentration of wealth, in terms of the effects of climate change, who it's going to be felt by. It's all those people who have nothing. So what's their political voice? If you have nothing and you can't participate in your process, and you're just being impacted by disease, by famine, by hunger, by drought, then the solutions are to either move, which is why we see the big refugee crisis, or the solution is to try to actually solve the problem from within your own country. And in some places that's just not tenable. So that's why the things are the way they are.
Yeah. So where do you think you'll be in 10 years, Duncan?
I have absolutely no idea. None. Can't even begin to guess.
Where do you think the United States will be in 10 years?
I don't know, but I don't know if I'll be there. So
I don't know, the way things are going. That apparently, this is a little bit of an aside here, that the Republicans are polling very high for the midterms.
Oh, I know. Well, that's always the case after an election. After a presidential, there's always a backlash in the midterms, unless your name is George H.W. or George W. Bush, and then you win more in the midterms.
Yeah, well, Biden's polling is apparently pretty low right now.
It's worse than Trump was actually polling 2% ahead if they were to rematch in 2024. So that says everything you need to know. I mean, Trump, as unpopular as he was, is now that we've had all this time of Biden, making America, whatever. What was his big Build Back Better, not Make America Great? Some other nonsense slogan.
Build Back Better.
Build Back Better. What does that even mean?
It's like as bad as Melania Trump's Be Best.
Be Best. Be Best actually makes more sense. I love all this new vocabulary we've got from our politicians in these last, few years.
Yeah, it's below. It's like below fourth grade reading level at this point. Build back better.
Build back
Be
better.
best.
See, when I see people tweeting like BBB, I'm like, Better Business Bureau? What?
Yeah, right.
Because I've been gone for so long, it just doesn't really click in.
Yeah. So now, what I think I want to do is play some commentary from activists, organizers who attended COP, because there has been like very little media attention on this outside of, let's say, Democracy Now!, which has done an amazing job covering COP. They do it every year. I mean, I think I would not be so informed about climate change if it had not been for Democracy Now! So, but outside of them, like, there's like so little. Everybody's obsessed with Kyle Rittenhouse and that trial, and
of course,
and still January 6th, you know, like CNN, MSNBC, climate change is not an issue for them. So I really want to highlight, you know, the actual voices of people who attended.
Oh yeah, good idea.
Yeah, because there's also a narrative that the United Nations is putting out, and world leaders are putting out, that this was great, and you shouldn't be so negative about it. Gosh, because last week we almost didn't even have 1.5 degrees C, and now at least it's hanging by a thread. So
yay.
Yeah, cheers to that. So, okay, so this is Assad Riemann. Let me load him up. He's an organizer, amazing, and he was actually on Democracy Now! Recently too. And yeah, if you haven't seen him, you should check that out. It was a couple of days ago. He was on Democracy Now! They did a full interview with him, and he's phenomenal. He's phenomenal, but he really just lays it out like this is a complete mess. So let's see where my mouse is. Here it is. All right, so I'm going to share this clip now. All right, play.
From demand climate justice. You have the
Assad Raymond, War on Want, speaking on behalf of the Climate Justice constituency. I'm finding it difficult to convey our anger and frustration at this utter betrayal of people. Hollow words about climate emergency from the richest countries, an utter disregard of the science and equity, false ambition and disdain for justice, a license to pollute with net zero 2050 and carbon markets. You have made decisions, as one party acknowledged, decisions about life and death for millions. Yet 500 years of colonial rule and white supremacy, looting the wealth of the global south, and you still value your profits over the lives of black, brown and indigenous people. The rich have refused to do their fair share. More empty words on climate finance. You've turned your backs on the poorest, who face a crisis of COVID, economic and climate apartheid because of the actions of the richest. It's immoral for the rich to talk about their future children and grandchildren when the children of the global south are dying now. We needed concrete solidarity and cooperation. The rich offered more empty words. You're not keeping 1.5 alive. You're setting us on a pathway to 2.5 degrees. You're setting the planet on fire and claiming to act. Your greenwashing kills, and no amount of spinning will mask that. But we are not without hope. It just will not rest with you, but with us, and we don't compromise on justice.
Yeah, so this was a really powerful speech or set of words that were spoken at COP. One of the most honest set of words, I think, that were spoken during that time. And I think he just really lays it out. Like, you guys don't care. You've sold us out. But you know what? We're going to keep fighting, because what else do we have? What other choice do we have? We have to keep fighting.
And I think most people recognize that the leaders really don't care. It's the market forces drive everything. And even in countries with a centrally planned economy like China, it's still driven by industrial capitalism. So, they might not have the same kind of corporate boards that the US does, but the effect in the long run is still going to be the same. So unless more people can get their voices heard and can actually get people to pay attention, or better yet, run for office themselves and win those seats, we're just not going to see any change that's meaningful.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. I hate to be cynical, but.
Well, I think everybody is sort of at that point, at least generationally speaking. I think young people, millennials, Gen Z in particular, I think they really understand that they have to fight for everything. There was a hunger strike actually outside the White House during the whole infrastructure stuff. Yeah, I didn't get a lot of coverage, obviously, but it was a bunch of people like late teens, early 20s, like 5 or so of them, and they went on a hunger strike for a couple of weeks until like their blood pressure dropped and the doctors were like, you need to eat. So it was really sad, and they chased down Joe Manchin at one point, and they were screaming at him like, we want to live, and they're like being pushed around in wheelchairs because they're so weak. I mean,
Yeah.
this is like how desperate people are, how desperate young people are, and they're not the first group. This also happened in Europe. I don't remember if it was in Germany or not, but it was one of those northern European
I did see a
countries.
similar event in Germany.
And
it's just
they did the
amazing
same
that,
thing.
like Manchin in particular, of all people, where he gets up and he says things like, "Oh, I'm very much against entitlements or entitlement spending," and then you see he gets coal subsidies for his own coal company. It's just the fact that he's the chair of the Energy Committee, who is really, which is really the board that we need to be able to actually solve the climate crisis, is just despicable. But he's the senior ranking member, so he gets to have the committee spot, and he gets a guy that actually is a coal baron gets to write our energy policy. So until things change in the U.S., where you have to actually divest from anything that you own when you hold office, that's not going to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a well-known economist, Michael Hudson. He worked with David Graeber and did a lot of research on debt, and he's always calling for a debt jubilee and stuff. And he basically, in a recent interview, was like, the United States, Joe Biden was like, let's put coal in charge. I mean, like, we're not going to end coal. And I mean, Joe Biden didn't actually outright say that, but he basically appointed Joe Manchin in charge, who has defended coal tooth and nail because, as you pointed out, he's highly invested in it. And I mean, this is the message. This is the global message from the United States: is we are going to dig in. We're going to continue to extract fossil fuels. We're going to continue to dig coal and use it and export it and whatever and make money off of it. And that's the bottom line, is making money off of this. And they did come to an agreement to phase out coal, at COP. And it sounded great, but like at the very end, India and China said, no, phase down.
Well, they have to. Yeah.
And I don't know what phase down means, but it's like, it's a much more ambiguous term. And it's because India and China don't want to give up their coal, I guess.
Well, the issue with them in particular is they're still considered emerging economies.
Right.
And if you basically deny them the access to the cheapest, most plentiful source of energy that we have, other than the sun, which is just there, they can dig coal out of the ground, they can burn that, they can use that to boost their own industry, but at the same time, it's killing the rest of the planet. But they're very clever with the argument that they make with, look, you Western countries have had access to this sort of power, technology for the past 100 years, and we haven't. So it's our turn to modernize. It's our turn to develop our industrial sector. And without this, we can't do it at a way that's economically feasible. So the argument that they're making, of course, from a climate change point of view is just horrible. But from the argument of an emerging economy, it makes sense to an extent. But you have to incentivize them to move away from these things. You have to make this other technology available. And if it's not, if clean energy is just something that you're not going to share with them, then they're going to do whatever they want. And when you have countries with, I think between the two of them, it's more than a third of the world's population, and they're all using coal, it's just going to continue to make the problem worse and worse and worse.
Yep. And I think that goes back to the lack of financing coming through the United Nations, the rich nations refusing to finance any of this, refusing to share their clean energy technology. It really just forces them to do exactly what you described, and that's part of the problem. That the rich nations don't want to share for some reason.
No, they don't.
It's incredible. We're not going to share with you, and we don't care if that means we blow up the planet in the process. You'll never get a piece of it.
Look at what we just went through with the vaccine, with the whole concept of vaccine patent rights. India can't make a vaccine because no one will let them, but they have they have one of the best pharmaceutical industrial sectors in the world. So clearly they can manufacture a vaccine on their own, but no one will give them the right to do it because, of course, Pfizer doesn't want to lose their patent right. So when you've got millions of people around the world dying from a pandemic that everyone sees because it's plain as day and we're seeing it, bombarded with it all the time, and then you just turn around and don't let the second biggest country in the world have access to the vaccine recipe, clearly you're not doing it because, well, we want their factories to be safe. No, you're doing it because you don't care if those people die. You want to make money. And it's obvious to anybody else. And it's the same thing with, clean power technology, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that actually was a big issue with the United Nations this year, because it was actually called the most privileged, the most white conference of all of the 26 COPs because of vaccine apartheid. And so all of these developing nations, who really are the ones being affected first and foremost by climate change, they had to either risk their lives or they just couldn't show up because it was just too dangerous. They don't have access to vaccines like the US and Europe do. China, they were able to develop their own vaccines. And why? Because I guess Angela Merkel said no. Angela Merkel said no. I don't think we should share. Nah. You guys don't get
And that says a lot about
the
approach to world, policy is that, well, our wealthy companies and people have to be protected. So it's still not a question of how can we fix the world. It's a question of how can we make things a little bit better for most people in the world while we still ensure that the rich and powerful people in our country are able to expand their wealth and power.
That's the most important thing. It's just, yeah.
Well, to our leaders, it is, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's not a joke, sadly. I mean, I'm laughing, but it's only because it's much better to laugh.
Exactly.
I could be crying instead, but I think I choose to laugh. So I want to highlight now a clip of Vanessa Nakate's speech. She's an Ugandan climate activist. She spoke at COP, and there's actually been a lot of controversy around her, and not because of herself and the things that she's done, but because she's been ignored, because she's African, she's Black, and she's been there's been two incidences where the media, like newspapers or whatever media outlets, have actually cut her out of pictures where she was like the only African person in the photo, and like the other activists were white Europeans, and she gets cut out and you only see like the blonde kids in the picture. And so that was hugely controversial. And so this was like a couple years ago when this happened. And then it happened again at COP. Like at the beginning of COP, there was a photo of her with Greta Thunberg, and they were sitting on opposite sides of the table with another European woman. And they only showed the European woman, it's like in her 50s or something, and Greta. And they cut Vanessa out. So it's
but
just,
she doesn't exist.
Yeah, she doesn't exist because she's Black, right? So it's pretty incredible the things that happen and at this scale, at this time in 2021, that you still have, like, she's apparently not good enough to be put in a picture. And she's an essential voice. She's done amazing work in her country. And here she's basically saying like, please prove me wrong, because I think you guys, I don't believe you.
The truth is that the atmosphere doesn't care about commitments. It only cares about what we put into it or stop putting into it. Humanity will not be saved by promises. It's hard to believe business and finance leaders when they haven't delivered before. They have not been faithful in their promises. They have not been honest in fulfilling their commitments. They have not been trustworthy in making their pledges a reality. So I have come here to tell you that we don't believe you. We don't believe that banks will suddenly put trillions of dollars on the table for climate action when rich countries have struggled since 2009 to raise $100 billion for the world's most vulnerable countries. We don't believe that promises made by financial companies to end deforestation will actually prevent trees from being cut or burnt down. We simply don't believe it. But I am here right now to ask business and finance leaders, show us your faithfulness, show us your trustworthiness, show us your honesty. I am here to say, prove us wrong. I'm actually here to beg you to prove us wrong. We desperately need you to prove us wrong. Please, prove us wrong. God help us all if you fail to prove us wrong. God help us. Thank you.
Jeez. I don't know. That's just terrifying, right? I mean, this is I think she's 22 now, or she's in her early 20s. And I mean, she's literally just like pleading, please take action, prove us wrong, because I don't think you have what it takes, but it's much better if you prove me wrong, because the alternative is horrifying, right? I mean, they're already facing issues due to climate change in Uganda with higher rates of precipitation. Like they've been at risk of their reservoir overflowing and flooding the neighboring communities. You know, these things are happening. They're feeling this. She was in an interview, she was talking about her organization where she's been installing solar panels on local schools, and that they've been able to install like solar panels in like 100 or 200 schools throughout the country. And there was this like really bad storm and flooding that happened, and because, you know, higher precipitation rates in a shorter period of time, which is expected as a result of climate change, and the school was destroyed. The solar panel looked like it survived, but there was these little kids, and she was describing a picture, the teacher with the little kids standing in front of their school, totally destroyed by this storm. And this is the struggle that she's facing, and it's somehow these leaders, that's not enough for them. Her concerns, the fact that she's facing this now in 2021, we're like at 1.2 degrees Celsius. We haven't hit 1.5 yet. I mean, you can only imagine what's going to happen to the global south when we do hit 1.5 degrees Celsius, which we're most likely we will. I mean, it's devastating. Madagascar, like I said, massive famine. I mean, and that's now. And that started, 1.1, 1.2 degrees Celsius. It's just, there's no words for the kind of genocide that is effectively being perpetrated here.
And then if we look at, the heat bubble that descended over the American and Canadian Northwest last year, where people died because they couldn't sweat because it was too humid. So these are things that we've never, the human, as far as we know, it's never been in the human experience before. So, maybe sometime in unrecorded history, 50,000 years ago, things were really hot somewhere once. But it's on a scale that it's honestly so difficult for people to comprehend that I think it's easy for them to ignore. And that's the biggest issue, is that even if you see it, you see effects of it in your day-to-day life. Like we started seeing this stuff with what I would say Hurricane Katrina probably, and those massive storm surges. And every single hurricane since then, not every single one, but we've had so many Category 4 and 5 storms. And that's not like a once in a generation storm happens every 2 years now in just the United States. Not to mention the firestorms that just ravaged Australia and West, the American West as well. So we have these extreme weather events that happen constantly, but we can't put it together as part of one big picture because it would be inconvenient. It's like our brains can't comprehend that, maybe, for the most part. It's just too big for us to really think of. And when people who do have, the brain capacity to explain this, look, what's happening here is happening there, but it's just manifesting in different forms. It's so easy for people to just ignore it and try to go about just their day-to-day lives, which for many people in the world is simply survival. If you're trying to just earn enough money so you don't lose your apartment, then and you're trying to feed a family, then you don't really care what happens with a polar bear. But if suddenly you or your family can't sweat anymore and you die from humidity, then that just suddenly becomes an issue that's right front center. But you might not be able to connect that to the drought in Madagascar or to the flooding in Uganda or other parts of the world. So it's really quite sad, but I think our perspective as individual humans is so limited and so narrow that we can't fathom something so big.
Yeah, and humans have a very difficult time with exponential scales too, with exponential growth. Humans think in linear growth, so that's hugely different in terms of how things blow up. Exponential growth is starts slowly and then it's massive. It's like a rumbling volcano that just poof spills lava all over the place, and you have no time to even run away from that. And that's sort of it's not easy for people to comprehend. But it's not just Madagascar, it's not just Uganda, of course. Like you said, Katrina, like the United States, Canada, whole towns have gone up in smoke because of the fires, which are being exacerbated by climate change, because as the temperatures go up, all of that moisture is being sucked out. So now you're increasing the amount of fuel you have available to burn. And when we see that every year now, fire seasons are much longer in the United States. Canada, a whole town gone.
Or in Turkey, there is no fire. There is no fire season in Turkey, but at the end of the summer, the whole area around Bodrum, the ancient city of Peloponnesus, was basically on fire. And just massive forests wiped out. And the amazing thing is the government had decommissioned all of the firefighting planes. So they had no ability to stop it, except Greece, who offered to send planes, but Turkey said, no, we'll handle it ourselves. So yeah, even in places here where we haven't experienced the damaging effects of climate change before, you see massive forest fires in areas where there have never been forest fires in our recorded history. So, and again, that's a symptom of climate change, which affects everyone and affects everyone in different locations differently. But again, I think it's because it affects them differently that people can't put it together that it's a worldwide problem. Or maybe they can, but like I said, and as we've discussed, there's so many people that just don't have the means to change their daily lives, and or even even if they did protest this, it wouldn't matter. As we saw, they just ignore the protesters or cut them out of an image when it's convenient.
Yeah, I think back to all of the actions that happened around guns in schools, gun violence, and the fact that we had elementary school kids mass murdered at a school, Sandy Hook, and then all the high school shootings after that, and the kids in Florida that walked out of school and they did all sorts of actions and protests, and it was massive. And you think that would be enough. And now it's just normal.
The NRA is a powerful, the gun industry is a very, very powerful lobby. Unless you can overcome public opinion or overcome the lobbying groups with just massive public opinion, it's not going to change anything.
But then again, I mean, things like Medicare for all are extraordinarily popular. Like 70% of the population in the United States thinks universal health care is a great idea. You can't get it passed. Can't get $15 minimum wage passed. Under a Democratic Party.
Keep your government hands off my Medicare.
Yeah.
I'll never forget seeing somebody get up and say that at an actual town hall event. But it happens. And people just
Medicare.
Yeah, and people, well, they don't like the idea of government control, but they like the idea of public service. So you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have, public service can be dealt with in different ways, but
public services, not like I'm serving the public.
Yeah, no, I know. Public services.
Public
service. Yeah, no. Public services. I think it would be easier if Citizens United probably had that happen too. I think that really screwed things up in that regard. But yeah, I just think that when you look at the pandemic, you look at how gun violence has been pretty much ignored, or Black Lives Matter pretty much ignored, and I see that climate change, even if a lot of people in the United States cared about it, which I think a lot of people do, it still doesn't seem to be enough. So it really raises the question of what's the next step? What do we do now? And it seems to me that a lot of people are looking at COP26 and saying, okay, this is the COP where we realize that world leaders have failed. We have no hope in, that they will do the right thing. So we have to do this ourselves. So I want to play two people. George Monbiot, he's a journalist with The Guardian, also very involved in climate change activism in the UK, and also Rupert Read, who's also, he's an activist and a professor also out of the UK. And they both are a little more sobering takes on COP26. But I think it's important that people face this reality that this is not a simple thing. This is not, we can't just like ignore it and hope that it'll get figured out, because it's not. That's not what's happening. Our world leaders are not figuring this out. They're just making these very vague agreements, and which have no teeth to them, which push back another decade, 2 decades away the solutions that we need right now that we needed 2 decades ago. So let me I've got George queued up here, so let me share this. And we're also starting to run out of time here, but let's see. This clip is pretty short.
So we're coming almost to the end of the climate summit here in Glasgow, and what a total fiasco it is. I mean, this really is getting very close to the last possible chance. And instead of the sweeping change which we need, like a decision to leave all fossil fuels in the ground by 2030, no more burning at all of fossil fuel by then, that's the scale of things we need. Not even on the table, not a prospect, not even an idea that these should be discussed. And instead they're giving us this pathetic limp rag of a document demonstrating that they are here not to protect life on Earth, but to protect the fossil fuel industry from challenge.
Okay, and let me cue up Rupert Read, because he also had a very sort of not too optimistic take here, but hang on a second.
Well, we're not in the business of optimism specifically.
I think, yeah, there's no room for optimism. I think there's only room for realism now.
Mm-hmm.
I want to make
Absolutely.
a bold claim. I think it's true. This COP will go down in history as the COP that killed 1.5 degrees. It is not true that 1.5 degrees has been kept alive by this COP. It's not even on life support as far as I'm concerned. The analyses of the Climate Action Tracker and the UNEP Emissions Gap Report addendum are clearly showing that when you take into account what is realistically offered by this COP, then we are heading for closer to 3 degrees. And it is no longer possible to let them credibly get away with saying that that's a way of keeping 1.5 degrees alive. When I read the draft agreement the other day, I was actually shocked. I've got to admit it to you. I feel almost scandalized about myself to say that, because I've been warning for months about how ineffectual this COP was going to be. But even I wasn't expecting something as vapid as the actual document. There's basically nothing in it. Nothing by way of commitments. All it says is we want to try and do this, that, and the other in the future. It is simply an exercise in kicking the can down the road. That's it. And given that, we must conclude that 1.5 degrees is no longer credible. And this is a terrible thing to have to say, but I think it's nothing but the truth. So, because of the recalcitrance of a substantial number of countries, COP26 has failed us, and it has failed our children who are left begging for their lives. And in the light of that, I want to raise a couple of uncomfortable questions. First question is this. Yeah, sure, we can point our fingers at the fossil fuel industry, obviously, and at the countries failing to show leadership, and there are other villains as well. But what about our own role in this? does it actually make sense to be part of a process which is so direly off the pace? Are those of us who have been strong critics of this COP, of the COP process, of the recalcitrance of those countries and so forth, are we nevertheless in some sense legitimating the process by way of being here, even as we sit here in this press conference? I'm not honestly sure what the answer to this question is, but it seems to me that we have reached the point where we need to ask a question like that. We have reached a point where we need to no longer assume that taking part in this can-kicking exercise actually makes sense. And my second uncomfortable question is this. Well, if there's anything right about my first uncomfortable question, well, should there be further elements to this can-kicking exercise? Should we be all assuming that, well, of course there'll be a COP27 at Cairo and then a COP28 and so forth? Is that also now potentially part of the problem rather than of the solution? Should there be more COPs? It will be said in response, but look, I mean, the COP process may be dire, but it's better than having no process at all. And it does at least supply some kind of legitimacy in international law to claims from protesters in courts and so forth. But what I'm saying is we have to make an honest assessment. Do the benefits at this point actually outweigh the costs? Would it be better to say, it's not 1 minute to midnight, it's not midnight, it's 5 past midnight. The COP system has failed. Arguably, it was designed to fail. It never had any sanctions built into it, as, for example, the Montreal Protocol did. There was never any way of enforcing anything that's been happening these last 25 years. Should it actually carry on? So that's my second uncomfortable question. And now my conclusion. If you think that anything that I've said is true, then we must take the first steps of fully claiming our agency and no longer outsourcing it to governments and to a process who are clearly not intending to use it to save us. And what's the implication of that? Well, right here in Glasgow, we need to find some strong way of asserting that. We need to find some strong way of asserting that we recognize, I'm going to use a bit of sort of copy language here, that we recognize that it's 5 minutes past midnight, that we recognize, that we acknowledge that our governments are not planning to save us, and that we intend to take back the power that they have abdicated using. And what that means in very small micro terms, it seems to me, in the next couple of days as this COP comes towards a close, is that not just outside the blue zone, but inside the blue zone, we should consider protesting. We should consider walking out. We should consider joining those who are outside the exits. We should consider joining those who are going to be protesting in London on Saturday. We must mark and narrate this infamous moment in human history, the moment where 1.5 became consigned to history and where it became clear that no one's coming to save us.
So sobering, and actually the guy sitting next to Rupert Reed, that's Paul Beckwith, who is an amazing climate scientist, and he has his own YouTube channel, which I recommend people following. Paul Beckwith on YouTube. He goes through a lot of climate articles and explains everything that's happening on the science side, in case you're curious about that. But so that was Rupert Reed. He is one of the original kind of founders of Extinction Rebellion in the UK, who's a professor, or is a professor at one of the colleges there. And he's basically said that, you know, this has killed 1.5 degrees as a goal, and we need to do something else. He actually said maybe we should just be walking out. And I don't know if this happened before or after he said that, but there was actually a moment during COP towards the end where a bunch of activists did walk out of one of the sessions. So that was, that was very symbolic as well. So I don't know what's going to happen between this COP and next COP, but to me, it sounds like people are going to be organizing and really they're hoping for more massive action on the streets because this isn't working. It's not working on doing anything to stop what's happening with the climate.
Well, like I think he said, the 1.5 goal is dead. So they're going to move to what, a 2 or 2 and 2.5. And once we demonstrate we're going to go past that, they'll make it 3 or whatever. It'll just keep changing. The people attending this and the people in charge have no interest whatsoever. They don't care. Most of these people will be dead long before this ever becomes a problem. But for the younger generations, like you said, Gen Z, this is the world they're going to inherit, and that their kids are going to inherit. So you'd think that people would take more care of the planet, but at the same time, I have to look out for my own children. I have to have a nest egg for them, whether it's billions of dollars or whether it's a house or whatever. So people are much more concerned and caught up in their own lives, and they don't think about the bigger problem that quite literally affects every life on this planet. So,
yeah, it's very short-term focused, which is the problem, which is completely the problem. And I will say that the Paris Agreement actually, the goal was to keep it 2 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
That's really sort of where the target is. But then there was this like aim to keeping it below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So to me, I feel like there was never an honest effort to really keep it below 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Do you think there's really an honest effort to keep it below 2? Really?
Well, at this rate, it's not going to happen by end of century.
No one in charge cares because their kids and their kids and their kids will all be fine because they're really rich. I hate to say it that way, but if you think about the practical reality, the materialism of it, if you don't have wealth and you're stuck someplace that's going to be impacted by this, you're going to become a climate refugee and you're probably going to die on the way to somewhere where it's not as bad. And the people in charge and their kids and whoever else aren't going to care because they're fine. What was it Stephen Colbert said? I mean, it's not, this is, pre-CBS Stephen Colbert.
The good version of Stephen Colbert.
Yes, it's not. There's no global warming because it's 35 degrees outside today, and world hunger isn't a problem because I just had a sandwich.
Right,
so
exactly.
If you internalize everything through your own lens and your own day to day, and even the aspirations for your own future, your kid's future, you're more concerned about, well, is my kid going to get into a good college? Then are they going to inherit a radioactive wasteland? So one of these is a tangible thing you can see that everyone's dealing with, and the other one is a potential future problem that most of us know is going to become a real problem, but they don't see it that way because it's not right in front of their face. And I think maybe because humans have we have a generally short lifespan, we don't think of things long term. So in a sense, I think the only country that really has any ability to actually curb climate change is China, because they actually have a centrally planned economy, but they haven't demonstrated a commitment to actually doing that because, like you said, they wanted to opt out of the coal restrictions. So if you have a centrally planned economy, you can do whatever you want with your government's money, build an infrastructure that doesn't rely on fossil fuels. But instead, because fossil fuels are the means to the end, they're going to continue to do that until either we run out or until it just becomes completely untenable to continue to use it.
Yeah, and the opposite is to really degrow these sectors, draw down, and then grow a new sector, renewable energy sector. But that involves a very difficult transition in which the rich countries have to use less. They have to consume less than what they do now, and including China. I mean, China built all of these high-rise buildings, apartment buildings that were never occupied, and they recently just demolished them. And that was so much concrete, and there's so much CO2 that was emitted from in the process of generating that concrete to build these buildings that nobody ever lived in. Like, this is so excessive. Like, there's so much change that has to happen, structural change, transformative change, that I think that alone is extremely overwhelming for leaders, for the political leaders who have benefited so much from this system and cannot fathom what it takes to transition from the existing system to this new system, which will be, we want it to be a just transition. We want it to be equitable. We want it to be pro-environment. And it's not that the solutions don't exist, but it's just that in order to do that, you have so much you're going up against, all this money, and it's a whole other war that I think they themselves don't want to face. So I think the only solution really is for people to somehow realize that their lives, within a short time, within a decade, your life is going to be very different. And I don't know if it's going to be better or worse. But if the trajectory is going with climate change as it is now, that I have a feeling it's going to be worse, because climate change is going to exacerbate the economy, and you're talking about economic collapse. You're talking about like these horrific heat waves. You're talking about like more hurricanes, massive fires. Like, if you're, droughts, if you're okay right now, you might not be okay in 10 years. So you need to really think about that and think about what you need to do to be okay under climate change, because our political leaders are unwilling to take the steps to protect you. So what does that mean for you as somebody who's watching this, and for ourselves? Like, what do we have to do? How do we reorient our lives so that we're working towards this goal of keeping our planet habitable, not just for future generations, but also for ourselves? Because this is going to happen, even as millennials. Like, this is happening in our lifetime. By the time, millennials will start to be in their 50s and 60s in 2050. And that's scary. That's going to be scary. 2050 is going to be scary for our generation as well. So, and even before then, if these things don't change, 2030 is going to be scary. 2040 is going to be scary. We just don't know the extent.
Yeah, every incremental addition, and like you were saying, seeing effects in our lifetime. We've already experienced it ourselves. Maybe I wasn't in a place where I died because I couldn't sweat, but we're aware that this is happening. And even then, people look at any kind of footage from the Arctic. It's just tragic. And how many of our lives have been, we could probably make an argument that most people's lives have in some way been directly impacted by the effects of climate change. Like, for instance, I was not able to visit southern Turkey in the summer, which I usually do since I've lived here, because it was on fire. And if, for those of you who live in California, which I know is probably a big chunk of our audience, you've lived with the threats of wildfires, which they've always been there, even the last 20, 30 years, but now it's so much worse and so much more widespread, and they continue so much longer. And if you live on the East Coast, you've dealt with hurricanes your whole lives, but now they're much more severe, intense, and frequent. So you have been dealing with these effects of climate change, and it's just that you've done a pretty good job distracting yourself from not seeing what's right in front of you. And until everybody is in a position where we all know what the problem is, and we all know how to address the problem, which is really rein in the polluters. And by that, I don't mean things like, airlines, sure, they contribute. But if we look at the size and scope of the military, especially the US military, and how much poison they dump into the atmosphere and dump into the oceans, until we wrangle with something like that, we're never going to get to a point where we can live in a safe planet. And of course, now that brings us back to our first clip, where clearly what we need to do is spend more money on the Navy, because that's what's going to stop climate change. Is we're going to stop our boats from polluting as much. Maybe just have fewer boats. It's a lot less expensive, and you don't burn as much oil. But that, for some reason, that thought doesn't enter into their heads. But when Abby Martin asks, what are you going to do about the pollution by the Air Force and the Navy? They say, well, we're going to spend a lot of money on the Air Force and the Navy. Ha ha. I don't think that's exactly what Abby Martin had in mind when she asked them, what are you going to do about this real tangible problem? Well, we're going to spend more money on the military. I mean, just think of it. This is how tone deaf the people that we put in office are. And Nancy Pelosi is one of the supposed good guys. Mitch McConnell would have got up and said, well, it's time to move to Arizona so you can go swimming. So it's a very, very different reality, even with the Democrats in power.
Yeah,
we're still not getting a real answer.
Yeah, or if John McCain were still alive, bomb, 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 Iran. Like that's they don't even hold back on that. They're
the worst Beach Boys spoof song of all time, I would say.
Yeah. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The Democratic Party is completely tone deaf. This is the leadership in the House, Nancy Pelosi, as we showed earlier. I mean,
Joe Manchin in the Senate,
Joe Manchin in the Senate, the Colbert, and deciding what stays in our infrastructure bill, what stays in the reconciliation bill. Completely opposed to anything related to climate change.
No.
And we talked about this, I think, on the show last week, that the whole like clean energy incentives were completely taken out of the infrastructure bill. So, like you brought up earlier, incentives matter, and our government is not going to incentivize this transition, at least not with Joe Manchin in charge, or Joe Biden. So
either, which one's really in charge? That is the real question. That's a question for next week, kids.
Kristen Sinema, I think. the fake progressive. So we are definitely out of time, but I wanted to end with a very, very short 15-second clip of the wonderful, the amazing David Attenborough, who has just, I think he's in his 90s now, and he's made this one of his most important missions in life is to get the message out about climate change and to change as many people's minds as possible. And this was a clip of what he said at COP26, or this is a clip of what he said at COP26, and this was his message.
Is this how our story is due to end? A tale of the smartest species doomed by that all too human characteristic of failing to see the bigger picture in pursuit of short-term goals. Is this how?
I mean, yeah, basically is.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but yeah.
He summarized it exactly. We're the smartest species, but cannot see the bigger picture.
But are we the smartest species? I don't know about that.
That's a very good question. We certainly have the capacity to do great things with our intelligence, but we squander it for these very, very ridiculous short-term goals.
I think our climate change, this disaster, is going to actually kill the smartest species, which is definitely not us. It's all the aquatic mammals who can see sonar in their minds, which is something we can't even understand. But they've been evolving for millions of years. We've been around here for just a couple 100,000, and we've managed to completely screw up the planet. And they have done nothing to the atmosphere. So tell me which one is really the most evolved or intelligent species.
Yeah, you might be right.
Dolphins.
You might be right. Dolphins, whales, octopus, maybe.
Possibly.
or ants.
I'm not sure about ants. I'd put octopuses over ants.
Ants
We're ranking intelligence by species.
Ants understand how to do work. Do you know some ants are lazy workers?
True. Bees as well, if we're going to get into insects. But
yeah, bees. And when we're killing them,
they've been here a lot longer than us, and hopefully they'll be here long after we're gone. But we don't screw up the planet completely for the ants. Let them live, at least. Let the ants live.
Let the ants live. What about cockroaches?
Oh, they'll be here long after all the rest of us.
They'll survive. If anything survives, it'll be cockroaches. Well, we'll see if we go the way of the dinosaurs. And although the dinosaurs didn't kill themselves, apparently that was an asteroid. But that could be our destiny. But
if an asteroid was coming at us, could we actually stop it? I mean, look at the way we're dealing with climate change. I'm pretty sure we'd all debate about the best way to make money off the asteroid.
I don't know. I think we have a better chance of blowing up an asteroid than dealing with climate change at right now. The way things are going.
One missile. It's a lot easier.
But I don't want to leave people in so much despair. I just want people to be realistic, our viewers to be realistic, and to take action. And whatever that means for you, you must take action, because this is this is what's happening right now with our politics, not just domestically, but internationally. The leadership of all of these countries are not living up to what science is saying that we need right now, what activists are saying that we need right now, and by the way, the activists are acting on the science. So, so if they're not prepared to do what it takes, are you prepared to do what it takes to secure the future for your children and your grandchildren? Because they're the ones who will suffer more. All those who are yet to be born will suffer more. So we must do for them. We must do this for them, not just for ourselves, but for them. So really think about what it takes on your part. Everybody's busy. I know we talked about people are so busy that this is hard to register, but every little bit counts, especially in an emergency like this. And we are in an emergency, and our house is on fire, and the globe is on fire, literally. And we can no longer wait for our leaders to take action. So you must take action. Whether it means you run for office, whether it means you start a local organization, whether you start working on your own community to convince everybody to put solar panels or to conserve water or something, whether it means you fight for more commuter rail, more access to buses, because we don't need more cars, right? That's not the solution. And it's not, just switching to electric cars is not the solution, because that requires a lot of rare minerals or rare metals, like lithium, for example. And
also requires the power grid, which, relies on fossil fuels.
Yeah. And so this is a whole, there's so much complexity here. So it's really on all of us to educate ourselves on climate change and to figure out where we fit into this, because it's like a war effort. In World War II, everybody did their part. People, when they worked in the factories, they did whatever it was they had to do. They were, their local military patrol, like in It's a Wonderful Life, like George Bailey. He do you remember that, George Bailey? Yeah,
I've never seen that movie.
Oh my gosh, yeah, he used to whistle. He had like the whistle, and he was like the military patrol in his neighborhood, in his little town. And that's what he did. And then his brother went off to
military patrol in your town.
Yeah,
You're in America. Isn't that at peacetime? I don't understand.
I don't know. It was something like that. But
was he in England?
No, he was in the U.S. I don't know, but he had a whistle. He had a little whistle. It was like air raid person or something. Like maybe it was like air raid.
But they didn't get air raided. That doesn't make any sense. I'm so confused.
They were like, like practicing in case they did. And then, like Mama Bailey, like, I don't know, like they sewed things. But like the whole point, somebody who's watching knows what I'm talking about. Somebody who's watching knows what I'm talking about. The point is that everybody has a role to play in terms of fighting climate change and fighting our inept leadership. So you must figure out what that is, and you must do it. And there's no better time to do it than now, because we are running out of time. We have only a decade to keep our planet from going past 1.5 degrees Celsius. And even if it does, we still have to keep fighting, because every 0.1 degrees matters. So that's where I think we'll leave it today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I'm very sorry that Carlos could not be on the show today. He had, there was some prior engagement that happened. And thank you so much to Duncan. Duncan, is it okay if I say your last name? Because you didn't include it.
Sure, go ahead. I didn't know what I was supposed to put there. It was a very last minute thing, everybody.
Yeah, it was. I'm so thankful. Duncan Chelsea. This is Duncan Chelsea. He's
Chesley.
one of my best.
Oh God, you got my name wrong.
Oh God. So I don't even know how to say how do you say your last name?
Duncan Chesley. That's
what I said. Didn't I say Chesley?
You said Chelsea. It's okay. Everyone does.
No, I did not say Chelsea. I said Chesley. You misunderstood.
Wind the tape back.
You wind it back.
You have it. I don't have it.
I can't wind it back. It's live. Point is, Duncan was here. He filled in at the last minute. He gave up his Patriots game to be here. So thank you.
I didn't give it up. It's paused.
Oh, he paused the Patriots game. So thank you so much, Duncan, for coming in at the last minute. It was so fantastic to have a co-host fill in. Made it so much more fun. And thank you to our audience for being with us. And just a reminder that the Bernie Sanders Brigade page is still banned or like it's still under review. I have no idea when we're going to get that page back. The Bernie Sanders Brigade page was the #2 Bernie page on Facebook, and there was no reason given for why it was put under pending review, and it's still pending review. So I would just like to ask everyone to please subscribe on YouTube, and I'm going to post this right now.
Are we still calling it Facebook? I thought they changed their name.
They can go,
This shows how
themselves.
out of the loop I am, honestly.
Yeah, they're Meta now, but they're like being
Oh,
sued
Meta.
by 2
They're
people
Meta.
or something, 2 organizations. Subscribe to the
Good.
show on YouTube. Okay, I'm just.
What's our
please-
description?
What?
Huh?
What did you
How
say?
do I find this show if I don't know how?
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna post it right now.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so if
Including this bit.
yeah, so you can search for, oh, what the heck? Here we go. Inside Out News. Actually, let's do this one. Inside Out News. So youtube.com/Insight Out News, insight as in insightful. So please subscribe to us there. This is my old reporting channel, and we have archived all of our episodes of Stand Up Fight Back on there. And that's a great place to find us. It's not likely to be censored like on Facebook. So if for whatever reason any more of these Facebook pages get censored, you can find us on YouTube. And we air every Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time, or 9 p.m.
10 o'clock Istanbul
10
time.
p.m. Istanbul time if you're in Turkey like
9
Duncan.
p.m. Well, we're an hour and a half into this. Okay.
Ooh, yeah, it's getting late. So thank you, everyone. And please remember to wear a mask and get vaccinated if you haven't already. And we'll see you again next week. I'm Margot Pies, your co-host on the show, and this is Duncan Chesley.
Duncan Chesley, nice to meet you all. Have a very nice evening.
Special guest co-host
Hey,
filling in for
whatever.
Carlos Marukin. And we'll see you again next week. Goodbye, everybody. Have a really, really good week.